Beleriand means little to most people from the Third Age. It was an ancient land that drowned beneath the sea following the devastating War of Wrath, which saw Morgoth defeated. It now only exists in the memories of those who once lived in those lands, elves such as Elrond, Galadriel or Glorfindel, or Ents such as Treebeard. But not all of Beleriand drowned beneath the sea. Some parts survived the War of Wrath, and even survived into the Third Age. In these places, you could see ancient memories come to life, so in this video, what remained of Beleriand in the Third Age? The most obvious and well-known part of Beleriand that survived is actually the land of Lindon, the northern part once being known as Vargelion, and the southern part once being known as Osiriand. Vargelion was inhabited by Feanorians under the leadership of Caranthir, and later briefly inhabited by the Haladin and Uldor's Easterlings. Osiriand was inhabited by Green Elves, who mostly stayed out of the conflicts of the First Age. Following the War of Wrath, these lands survived but still underwent significant changes. Vargelion lost some of its territory, and Lake Helivorn, along with many of the nearby mountains, were destroyed. Osiriand lost even more of its territory, and the 7 rivers that once made the land famous were seemingly completely destroyed. A wide body of water, known as the Gulf of Lune, rushed in through a newly formed gap in the Ered Luin, leaving the land separated. The northern land would be known as Forlindon, mostly inhabited by the Noldor, whereas the southern land would be known as Harlindon, mostly inhabited by Sindar or the remaining Green Elves. These lands would form the core of Gil-galad's kingdom in Lindon, and after his death at the end of the Second Age, they would be ruled by Círdan. Although not technically part of Beleriand, the Blue Mountains did play a part in the events that occurred in that land, and they too were majorly affected by the War of Wrath. In the First Age, the Blue Mountains were a long wall that spanned from north to south, and in the centre stood the tall mountain known as Dolmed, where 2 dwarven cities were built, Belegost on the northern face and Nogrod on the southern face. This mountain range was left shattered by the War of Wrath, greatly reduced in both the north and south, with a massive hole forming in the centre. The dwarven cities of Nogrod and Belegost were ruined beyond repair, although the modern consensus is that both these cities, as well as Mount Dolmed, did not sink underwater as previously thought. The Blue Mountains remained inhabited by dwarves through the rest of the Second and Third Age, and despite being greatly reduced in size, they were probably the most pleasant mountains in Middle-earth. The next lands are little known, and they all require boats to reach. The closest to the coast of Forlindon is the island of Tol Himring, once known as the Hill of Himring, where Maedhros' fortress once stood. From that fortress, Maedhros ruled supreme over the Feanorians and the lands of East Beleriand until the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, when the fortress was taken by Morgoth's forces. For one reason or another, the hill survived the War of Wrath, becoming the only other place in eastern Beleriand to survive the drowning. Whether the ruins of Maedhros' fortress still stand is unknown, but either way, one could probably stand where he stood nearly 7,000 years earlier, but instead of the wide lands of Beleriand, you would only see the cold, foreboding ocean. Perhaps it was a pilgrimage site for the elves of Lindon, or perhaps it just served as a haunting reminder of the glory and sorrow of the Elder Days. Another land that survived the War of Wrath mostly intact was the highlands of Dorthonion, also known as Tal Nu Fuin. The remnant of this land, surviving as one large island, would be called Tol Fuin, the Dark Island. Like Himring, it's not known why or how Tol Fuin survived, when the rest of Beleriand did not. In fact, it might be rather unfortunate that Tol Fuin did survive, considering the forests had largely been corrupted by Sauron long before the War of Wrath. I touched on this in one of my earliest videos. There's also the frightening proximity of Ered Gorgoroth, where Ungoliant's brood once inhabited. We know Shelob fled east, but perhaps not all of the giant spiders followed her. Some might have remained, and became trapped on Tol Fuin. If that is the case, hopefully they starved to death. But if that's not the case, an island full of giant, inbred, cannibalistic spiders might just be the most horrifying place in Arda. The final bit of land that survived the destruction of Beleriand would barely classify as an island. It's more of a lone rock, but it's important nevertheless. This is Tol Morwen, the location of the Stone of the Hapless, and the burial site of both Morwen Eledwen and Turin Taramba, and a memorial site of Neanor Niniel. Once again, it's not quite sure why this island survived. Perhaps it was spared by Iluvatar or the Valar as a sentimental reminder of the pain that occurred in Beleriand during the years of the First Age. Unlike Tol Himring and Tol Fuin, Tol Morwen is never shown on any maps created by Tolkien, but is directly referred as surviving in the text. Thus, its exact location is unknown, but it was almost certainly near the gorge of Kabad en Arras. And that's all that remains of Beleriand. A battered mountain range, a shrunken remnant of two larger lands, some haunted highlands, a singular hilltop, and a lone rock that serves as a tomb. Everything else is gone, vanished beneath the waves until the world changes, from snowy peaks to coastal lowlands, from underground cities to lofty towers. If you want to visit Gondolin in the Third Age, you better bring some scuba gear, or better yet, a submarine. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least found it interesting. I know this was a short video, but I like exploring the lesser known parts of Tolkien's world, and there are a few places lesser known than the surviving islands of Beleriand. Cheers, thanks again, and remember, giant inbred cannibal Spider Island.